Welcome to our first video for Unit 9, which is on development. Today we're going to be talking about prenatal development and cognitive development. All right, so what's the biggest influence on our behavior? Is it nature or is it nurture? Here I've included an image that gives you a couple different of the approaches that we've talked about in psychology so far and where they fall on the scale of nature versus nurture. Today we're going to mostly focus somewhere on the middle, which is cognitive psychology. All right, so at conception, that's when a male sperm fertilizes a female egg, and once it does that, the egg will block all other sperm, and now you start making a baby. Women are actually born with all the eggs that they're ever going to have. So ladies, when you're born, you have all the eggs you're ever going to have. You do run out. So that's what they mean by your biological clock is ticking, because when you get the older you get, you run out of eggs, and then you go through menopause. Men, however, aren't born with all their sperm. They actually start producing it when they hit puberty. Now, once they hit puberty, they're going to produce that sperm 24/7 for the rest of their life. They don't run out. All right, genetics. So now you are a new one-celled entity, and you contain 23 pairs of chromosomes. One member of each pair, one from the mother, one from the father. Each chromosome contains thousands of genes. Either individually or in combination, these genes will produce particular characteristics for you and for each person. Okay, these genes are composed of sequences of DNA molecules. Some genes are responsible for development of some very common systems that all humans have, such as your heart, brain, lungs, so on and so on, while others control characteristics that make you unique, like your eye color, height, facial features. Your sex is also determined by a combination of genes, and this happens on the 23rd chromosome. So that last pair determines whether you're a boy or girl. All right, prenatal development. First, you start off as a zygote, which is simply a fertilized egg. Fewer than half of zygotes actually survive the first 2 weeks. If you do survive the first 2 weeks, then you go into this embryonic stage, which is from weeks 2 to 8. At 2 weeks, you're a zygote, you now become an embryo. By 4 weeks, an embryo has developed this rudimentary beating heart, brain, and intestinal tract, and although they're very primitive, you can still recognize what they are. And finally, by 8 weeks, an embryo is about an inch long, will have arms, legs, and they're starting to develop a distinct face. All right, so here you are at about 6 days old, right? You're a bunch of cells just dividing. By 4 weeks, this is what you look like. Okay. And finally, by 8 weeks, now you start to look a little bit like a baby. All right. You got your arms, legs. This is clear. This is your head, and here's your little eyeball. All right. Then you enter the fetal stage, which is from 8 weeks on up to the time you're born. At about 8 to 9 weeks, you are now called a fetus. So you went from a zygote to an embryo to a fetus. Around 4 months, fetal movement is actually strong enough to be detected by the mother. So that's where you're going to the moms are going to notice like their stomach moving, the baby's actually moving, kicking them. And in some cases, if you look, you can actually see it kicking you and see it when it moves around. It's actually kind of neat. You not only feel it, but you can see it in some cases. At around 6 months, your eyelids will open and you have a well-developed grip, so a grasp, as well as taste buds. Then the fetus will reach its age of viability at around 24 weeks. What that means is the baby at 24 weeks is able to survive outside of the womb, even if born prematurely. Right? However, about 50% of premature babies survive at this age, but that percent increases with each passing week. The fetus will continue to grow and gain weight during the last 2 months. And by the end of a 38-week pregnancy, which is about 9.5 months, that's normal, you'll typically weigh between about 7 pounds and be about 20 inches long when you're born. Ask your parents how much you weighed and how long you were when you were born. I guarantee you, you're probably somewhere around in this range unless you were born prematurely. Prenatal influences on genetics. You can have um, some genetic defects, which are faulty genes or chromosomes. Down syndrome is one case. This occurs when a zygote receives an extra chromosome at the moment of conception. This can cause mental retardation, usually anywhere on the scale from very mild to moderate. And this is more common in mothers over the age of 35. So it becomes pretty common. So children with Down syndrome tend to have a very distinct look about them. So I posted some pictures of kids with Down syndrome. And here it tells you what those distinct facial features are. They always kind of stand out a little bit. Then you have environmental factors. All right, teratogens are environmental agents such as drugs, chemicals, viruses, and other factors that can produce birth defects. So, for example, the mother gets rubella, which is German measles. This can cause the child to be born blind, can cause deafness, heart abnormalities, and even stillbirth, which is where you're carried to term, right? And you're born, but you're born and you're not alive. Syphilis can cause mental retardation, physical deformities, and even the mom to miscarry. And AIDS can be passed from the mother onto the child at birth. Illegal drugs like cocaine can result in a baby being born addicted to that drug. And even legal drugs can cause fetal abnormalities such as alcohol and nicotine. You've probably heard of fetal alcohol syndrome. This is a condition not only resulting in mental retardation, but growth retardation as well. So like height and everything like that, like stunted growth. Babies with fetal alcohol syndrome also have distinct facial features, all right? So small eyelid opening, very thin upper lip. Some other characteristics are listed here: low birth weight, developmental delay, poor socialization skills, poor memory skills, learning difficulties, behavioral problems are all typical of babies with fetal alcohol syndrome. Newborns. All babies are born with a number of reflexes or instincts, right? These things that we talked about in our last unit, they're unlearned involuntary responses that occur automatically in the presence of certain stimuli. Rooting reflex, we talked about this before. That automatic turning of the head when the cheek is touched. The sucking reflex, which is anything that touches their lips, they're going to try and suck on it. Startle reflex, which is where if there's a loud sudden noise, the infant's arms will start flailing and its fingers will start to fan out. The Babinski reflex, which is where if you like are tickling the bottom of the baby's foot or even just like stroke it ever so gently, their feet will actually like stretch out and their toes will stretch apart. But all of these reflexes are actually lost after the first few months and are replaced with more complex behaviors. So these are those instincts we talked about before that you grow out of. Then you reach infancy. All right. Make a basic list of skills that you have developed either through maturation or they involve some type of training or learning. Maturation is the process by which the genetic program manifests itself over time. So you mature. All right, you can not only mature mentally, but biologically, physically. All right, so biological growth process that's uninfluenced by by experience. So, for example, the sequence of motor development is universal. All right, the maturation of this. So first you roll over, then you crawl, then you walk. Timing of this is individualistic, but overall these are motor skill developments. This is the order that they go in. So for example, you start sitting up without any support. You can sit up on your own at about 6 months. You'll crawl anywhere between 8 to 9 months. You start walking around the time you're 1 and walking independently without any real hand holding because you've really mastered the art of walking by the time you're 15 months old. Jean Piaget, we've talked about him way back in Unit 1. We talked about the different approaches to psychology. He's the guy in charge of the cognitive approach. He believed that children moved from stage to stage as they matured and were exposed to relevant types of experiences. So they developed their brain and everything developed based on how they experience things in the world. So your cognitive development is shaped by the errors that you make. You're going to start to hear the word schema used a lot more. I know we talked about it a little bit in the past. They're mental molds into which you pour your experiences, so how you start to convey how you know things. Children experience new things, and they shape their schema in one of two ways. They will either, one, do this through assimilation, which is where you interpret new information in terms of an existing schema, and accommodation, which is where you adapt your existing schema to incorporate new information. We'll talk more in depth about these two things in class. Just make sure you have them now. Try to come up with some examples of each. All right, so Piaget's stages of cognitive development. First, you have your sensory motory stage, which is where it's when you're born to about age 2. This is where you rely heavily on those innate inborn motor responses to stimuli. Mental representation, it's where you have the ability to form internal images of objects and events, and you also start to form object permanence toward the end of this stage, which is the knowledge that objects exist independently of your own actions or awareness. Stage 2 is the pre-operational stage. This happens, it's from age 2 to about age 6 or 7. This is marked by well-developed mental representation and use of language. So they start to talk a lot. However, kids in this stage tend to be very egocentric. So they experience egocentrism, which is a self-centered inability to realize that there are other viewpoints beside their own. It's really hard to explain to a child, almost impossible, how another person feels and to take that into consideration. Because they're mentally, they're not at that stage of development. They can't think that far ahead. They can't think like that. Animistic thinking, which is a pre-operational mode of thought in which uh, inanimate objects are imagined to have life and mental processes. Centration, which is a pre-operational thought pattern involving the inability to take into account more than one factor at a time. And irreversibility, the inability of the pre-operational child to think through a series of events or mental operations and then mentally reverse the steps. This is the stage in which when the child development students come in, when those kids come in, you'll start to ask them questions that'll determine what stage they're at. A lot of them are going to be in this stage, so they're going to have trouble because of egocentrism, their animistic thinking, centration, and irreversibility. So you're going to start to see that there, that because of their age, they can't do certain things. All right, concrete operational stage. This is the third stage from about age 7 to 11. This is where you understand conservation, but are still incapable of abstract thought. So conservation, what I mean by that is it's the understanding that the physical properties of an object or substance do not change, but nothing is added or taken away. You'll start to see this in one of the experiments that we're going to do. Mental operations, what I mean by this was solving problems by manipulating images in one's mind. So they start to do this. And finally, the last stage, formal operational stage, from age 12 on into adulthood, you really start to fine-tune this stage. Final stage of cognitive development where limitations from previous stages are actually overcome and you start to develop this abstract way of thinking. All right, so here are just a couple of images of or charts that I found that map out these stages. If you wanted to copy these down or these make better sense for you, just take a minute to look through the next couple things. So here's one chart that shows all of the stages and what happens in each one. Here is another one, so should you want to copy it down, you could do it this way. Here is another one. All right, lays it all out, age range, description, developmental phenomenon. And finally, for those that are more visual, that like pictures a little bit better, here's a representation for you. All right, you are going to need to know all 4 of these stages, and you're going to need to know them in order. So I would recommend coming up with a mnemonic device. So it starts sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So here's one option. Smart people can, sorry, I already messed it up. Smart people cook fish. Right, create your own, because mine's pretty lame. All right, so do one that's relevant to you that you're going to remember, so that way you know all of the stages in order and what happens in each one. All right, Piaget's stage theory has been influential globally, validating a number of ideas regarding growth and development and in many cultures and society. However, today researchers believe that development is a continuous process, that it doesn't stop here, and that children express their mental abilities and operations at earlier ages. So again, this isn't concrete, and that formal logic is a smaller part of cognition. There's one other guy that you're going to need to know for today, Vygotsky. He thought things a little bit differently than Piaget. He said children construct their knowledge, that learning can lead development, that development cannot be separated from its social context. So where Piaget thought of it as how you experience events on your own, that's how you develop, is based on your actual experience. Um, but Vygotsky thought of it more in terms of a social context and social interactions. So this is why he said that Vygotsky said language plays a central role in mental development. He said that by mentoring children and giving them new words, so when parents are speaking to their children, they're providing temporary scaffolds that are going to help move children through those stages of development rather than them just happening on their own. So if you start to have a conversation with the child and really talk to them, it's going to help them move from one stage of like Piaget's cognitive development to the next a lot easier and a lot quicker, because you're helping provide scaffolds, an easier way for them to get there rather than just waiting for the experience to happen on their own. He also talked about the zone of proximal development, which is between what a child can and cannot do. So it's what the child thinks that they can do with help, and that's where you provide your scaffolding, like riding a bike. All right, and then here are some more things I thought that you could look over. This is Piaget over here, so these are some of the things that he thought, and here's some things that Vygotsky thought. All right, like give children a chance to play. So just review some of these things, jot a couple of them down, and then I'm going to upload the quiz, so you can take that as soon as you are done. All right. Sorry, just stop.